It's like standing in the middle of a storm with somebody else, getting drenched yourself, but never learning how to offer shelter to the other person. So you're just standing there, being rained on, being soaked to no end, bearing the discomfort because if you leave, because this is the message you've been told, remember, if you leave, it means you have a choice. That the person who is in the storm, the other person, doesn't have. And it can be incredibly difficult because it questions the kind of human being you are.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. I am so happy you are here. In the last episode, I talked about how doing good can start to feel heavy. And I know that conversation resonated deeply because, and I'm so grateful for this, some of you reached out to me to say, Annie, that's exactly how I'm feeling right now. Or thanks for this episode. I needed it. And I was just so happy, so glad to hear that that episode was helpful. Now, if you're listening and you're like, oh, I need to potentially pause here and go back and listen. Yes, you do, my friend. Pause, go back to the previous episode, which is episode 86, then come back and listen to this one, episode 87. Okay, I'm gonna assume you've gone back and you've listened and you're catching this as we continue. So, one of the themes that has been coming up in my coaching sessions recently has been the difference between empathy and compassion. And I alluded to this a little bit in the previous episode, but I felt that we needed to dedicate an episode to this so that we could unpack it a little bit more. And particularly for us as heart-led business owners, someone who truly cares about inclusion, belonging, and racial equity, you probably have a lot of empathy. You feel deeply, you listen intently, and you honestly do want to make things better. It's probably why you became a coach, a space holder, an online business owner who provides services because you want to help in some way. But what I've come to realize is that empathy, while it's good, and yes, we need it, it can only take us so far. Without compassion, empathy can become a weight we carry rather than a guide that moves you forward. I remember hearing a message that what we needed in racial equity was radical empathy. And I believe I was deep in research many, many years ago. And this particular message was we need radical empathy. And whilst that's true, yes, we do need radical empathy. What I found missing in that message, and it wasn't until much, much later, is that it's not the only thing that's required. I found that radical empathy on its own can be quite confusing, especially when someone like yourself listening is navigating this work of racial equity. You take that message and you run with it. It may not have the outcome you expect because empathy without boundaries or direction can lead to emotional exhaustion. It's like standing in the middle of a storm with somebody else, getting drenched yourself, but never learning how to offer shelter to the other person. So you're just standing there, being rained on, being soaked to no end, bearing the discomfort because if you leave, because this is the message you've been told, remember, if you leave, it means you have a choice. That the person who is in the storm, the other person, doesn't have. And it can be incredibly difficult because it questions the kind of human being you are for leaving. And as coaches, we often pride ourselves on being empathetic. We listen with our whole hearts. We mirror the responses that we're getting back so that we're clear on what we're being told. We hold space for people's pain. But when it comes to racial equity, empathy can actually become overwhelming. I've seen it firsthand, and not just in me, but with my students, with my clients. And you start to feel the grief, the anger, the injustice, and you hold it all. Empathy is powerful because it connects us to others' experiences. But if we stay there too long, it becomes weighty. It becomes so heavy. And guess what? You can't lead from there. You can't sustain the work from there. So empathy is necessary, yes, but that's the starting point, not the destination. And what I see happening with a lot of online business owners who embrace this work, that's where they get stuck. They get stuck at empathy. But there's hope. And that's why I want to talk to you about compassion, because compassion takes empathy and turns it into movement. I love the word movement or action. It's the bridge between feeling with someone and doing something to help ease their pain. Dr. Halifax, who is a researcher on compassion, talks about something called empathetic distress. It's what happens when you absorb so much of another person's pain that it begins to harm your own well-being. She says empathy without boundaries burns you out, but compassion is what protects you. Compassion doesn't carry someone's pain, it responds to it. I love how that ties in with what we see in scripture. In the Bible, compassion is never passive. It's not just a feeling, it's actually a movement toward action. I'll show you. In the New Testament, in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verse 41, it says, when Jesus encounters a man with leprosy, it says he was moved with compassion. And then he reached out his hand and healed him. The man had asked, or rather, Jesus had asked him, what do you want? Do you want to be healed? And the man responded, if you are willing, I would love for you to heal me. And Jesus was filled with so much compassion when he had that, if you are willing, he said, I am willing. And he touched him and he healed him. And then in Matthew chapter 9, verse 36, he saw the crowds and was moved with compassion because they were confused and helpless. He described what he saw to his disciples as sheep without a shepherd. And that compassion led him to teach and guide them. Henry Nouwen, who is a Christian theologian, describes compassion as going where it hurts, entering into the places of pain and sharing in brokenness. That's love in action. And that's exactly what it means for us as coaches and space holders. We don't just empathize with the pain people carry, we respond with grounded presence, with courage, and with care. We listen deeply, yes, but we also learn, adapt, and change how we show up so that our empathy doesn't end at feeling, it leads us to doing. That's compassion. It's empathy in motion. It's love that acts. So, what does compassion actually look like in racial equity work? I want to share with you 5 ways I've seen it show up. Number 1, compassion listens deeply and then changes how it leads. So you don't just sympathize, or rather empathize. You examine your programs, your marketing, and your systems and adjust them to be more inclusive. Number 2, compassion acknowledges harm without centering guilt. And I've said it time and time and again. Once we begin to bring things like guilt and shame and fear into play, it just gets into the way of racial equity and we just are not able to move forward. And so compassion acknowledges harm without centering guilt. You can recognize where your business may have missed the mark and take ownership without collapsing into shame. Number 3, compassion educates itself. It seeks understanding. It does the work to learn so that it can ask better questions and so that it can show up informed. Compassion has boundaries. You care deeply, but sustainably. You don't take on every burden to prove your goodness. And number 5, and probably most importantly, compassion acts collectively. It's consistent, relational, and above all, rooted in love. Not in optics or performance. It's rooted in love. Compassion, in short, is where empathy becomes embodied equity. Empathy will get you started. Compassion will keep you going. But I also want to be clear about something. This work isn't done in isolation. Yes, of course, you need to read, you need to study, you need to stay informed, have conversations, I always say. But really, what sustains compassion is when it's done in community. And I think out of safety or not knowing where to find the right community, racial equity work can become a solo act of endurance, when really it should be a collective practice of care. That's how we keep going without burning out. That's why spaces like Represented exist to hold you as you do this work, to help you process, to remind you that you don't have to carry it on your own. Because when we move through empathy into compassion, we build a rhythm of giving and receiving care. And that, my friend, is what keeps the fire alive. Not the pressure to hold on to it, but the willingness, oh man, the willingness to share it. If you're listening and beginning to realize you've been trying to do this work through empathy, feeling deeply but unsure how to move from that awareness you now have into some form of action, I want to invite you to take a small step today. The next round of Represented is still quite a number of months away, but you can join the waitlist now. It's the best way to stay connected, receive updates from me, and continue reflecting on how to lead with compassion in your business. Inside Represented, we turn empathy into sustainable movement, the kind that brings real inclusion to life. You can join the waitlist at anigishuru.com/represented, and that link is in the show notes. So, as I close, as you go about your week, I would love for you to just take a moment. Just take a moment to look around or just to notice within you. Where have you been operating purely from empathy? And what might it look like to move from feeling to compassionate movement? Compassion not only understands, it responds. And that's where healing for us and for others truly begins.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented from coast to coast.